Thanks, Clark. Happy to be here, and appreciate the 24-hour synchronous stream that's going on at Telematic. In this moment when so much of our experience is asynchronous, it's fun to have the potential for everybody to watch the video at exactly the same moment in time, wherever they are. So as an artist and a scholar, I focus on the cultural, social, and political effects of software. Software being a human design structure for computation that determines much of our daily life at this point, from how we communicate to how we seek information, to how or whether we can cross borders. Clark mentioned some of the questions in that intro that I talk about. What does it mean for human creativity when a computational system can make its own artworks? How is an interface that foregrounds our friend count changing conceptions of friendship? And who benefits when a software system can intuit how we feel? Methodologically, much of my research fits within the field of software studies, and I do write and publish in that area sometimes. But the bulk of my efforts are in the creation of software-based artworks. These take many forms, from AI-controlled robotics to computational video, sound, and multidisciplinary performance, and I'll show a sampling of these. But much of what I'll talk about today are a series of internet-based works that use a method I call software recomposition, or the treating of existing websites and other software systems not as fixed spaces of consumption and prescribed interaction, but as fluid spaces of manipulation and experimentation. In other words, I write software to investigate the culture of software. Often I'm getting that code in between the user and the system, allowing anyone to examine their own relationship with software and to see how they're pushed and pulled by its designs. And to frame this conversation, I want to touch on an older work of mine called Interactive Robotic Painting Machine. This is an artificially intelligent robot that makes its own paintings using oil on canvas. And while it does so, it listens to its environment and considers what it hears as input into the painting process. And while this is an artwork and it can thus live in art-like spaces, when you make a robot like this and you put videos of that robot up online, it ends up feeding into a larger online culture around robot videos. And as a result, when I put this up in 2011, it was widely viewed and written about at the time. And some of these articles brought up questions you might be able to predict, questions of aesthetics. Does it know what good art is? Or agency? Is it really an artist? Does it know what it's doing? But also questions of fear. For example, the Huffington Post was worried that, alas, Grosser may have unknowingly birthed the apocalypse with his painting machine. And you know, what's happening here is people see a physically embodied, artificially intelligent software system that's doing what we tend to think of as the province of humans, in this case, making a painting. And people tend to worry about the negative implications of that, as you know, whether or not it's a precursor towards a classic Terminator narrative, or really just pick your favorite sci-fi villain, artificially intelligent villain here, whether it's HAL or etc. And I think what's interesting is that, you know, it's a physically embodied, artificially intelligent software system, and people worry about it instantly, even though all it's doing in this case is making mediocre paintings. Yet when it comes to a not physically embodied, artificially intelligent software system like this one, people don't tend to presume that it's equally as problematic, that it could be causing the same kinds of issues out in the world, or that this is the precursor to a classic Terminator narrative. And this presumption of neutrality interests me. And it is starting to change a little bit, especially since the 2016 election. But there's still a lot of people that don't think about these systems as kind of having ways of thinking embedded in them. And so this is a screenshot of my news feed. Here I've circled all of the metrics in red. These are the numbers, the visible numbers on the interface that count likes and shares, comments, notifications, how many minutes ago something happened, how many birthdays you're supposed to be responding to today. And as a user of Facebook, back in 2010, 2011, I found myself increasingly aware of just how much attention I was paying to these numbers. And it made me start to wonder how they might be leading myself and others to act in certain ways. For example, when I'm constantly told how many friends I have and how many friends my friends have, does this encourage me to forever add more friends? When I'm told that 17,772 people liked an ad for appycouple.com before I ever saw it, I wondered how that might affect the likelihood that I'll like that ad myself. And most importantly, when I'm shown how many likes my last status got, I wonder how that might start to guide what I write for my next post. And I've done some theoretical thinking and writing about these questions, drawing on scholars like Mark Fisher, the late Mark Fisher, Matthew Fuller, and Wendy Chun, theorizing about what I call the desire for more. This concept starts with our evolutionarily developed need for esteem. To survive as a species, we evolved with a need to feel valued, whether it's respect from others or confidence in ourselves. And this need now plays out in the context of capitalism, where value is quantifiable and growth is a constant requirement for success. And so the result of this intersection, the desire for more, as I call it, is particularly activated by the designs of social media interfaces that constantly report back to us measurements of how much we are valued. And so when we post something on a social media platform and it gets 10 likes, that's good, but we'd really rather have 11 or 12 or 20 or whatever. When we see that we have 100 followers on Twitter, that might make us happy, but we'd rather have 200. And there's really no end to this desire. And so this gives you a little bit of a background on my theoretical thinking here. But as an artist, before I do that kind of theoretical work, what I always do is I make something. And in this case, the thing that I made back in 2011, released in 2012, is this work that I call Facebook Demetricator. It's a free and open source browser extension that hides all quantifications across the Facebook interface, allowing anyone to experience for themselves what the effects of these numbers might be. And so here on the left, you can see a typical like, share, comment box. On the right is what it looks like with Demetricator installed. You can see that there are likes and that it has been shared and that there are comments you could view, but it's no longer is the focus on how much people like it or how many comments there are, but instead on who liked it or what they said about it. You're no longer encouraged to make the same kinds of comparisons you might do with friends. You can see that you have friends and that you have mutual friends with your friends. You could click on it and count up those friends if you needed to know exactly how many friends you have. But it's not foregrounding the number. I can decide for myself if an ad is of interest to me without being told of its interest to someone else. And so with this work, I'm recomposing the Facebook interface, and in this case, hiding the metrics in order to investigate how the metrics construct us as users, what they want from us. And I can say that from feedback from users, which I get a lot of, that these visible metrics make users competitive, compulsive, anxious. It influences what we post, what we like, who we follow, usually without us realizing that we are subject to the way these are influencing us. And so for me, this is a piece of critical software as art. And over the last few years, I've been keeping Facebook Demetricator going since 2012, currently rewriting it for the brand new Facebook interface. I've also added versions along the way for Twitter and for Instagram, so that users of those platforms can try it out. You may be aware that in the last 18 months or so, the companies themselves have started to talk about this since about, I don't know, May 2019 or so. And they've also started, at least in some cases, have done some experimentation with it. Instagram in particular got a lot of positive press about 15 months ago for having decided to hide the likes. If you're in the United States, however, you're probably familiar with the fact that they've never gone away and they're still there. And in fact, they have added new aspects to the interface, the Reels tab now, which brings on new metrics. So they had talked about it more than a year ago as they wanted to hide these likes because they thought perhaps they were not good for user well-being. But they haven't done it. And they have found time, though, to come after me legally and get my Instagram demetricator kicked off the Chrome Web Store. So they are focused on the topic of metrics. I'm just not sure they're ever going to hide them in the United States. So because of that, I'll, at least for the moment, keep these projects going as long as I can so people can keep trying this out. Because quantification as an interface component is an ongoing interest of mine, another work I wanted to talk about is this piece that I call More Like This. This is a multidisciplinary performance work for 2 saxophonists, artificial intelligence, interactive electronics, and participatory audience. And the participatory audience component is enabled through a web-based interface that you can see here, where anyone in the hall, whenever they want, can pull up a website at morelikethis.me, and they can hit plus or minus. And the cumulative count of all of the pluses and minuses are shown on your screen and above the performers, and it feeds into the AI, which is making decisions about what the performers should play. It tells them what to play, when to play it. It listens to how they play it to help it make decisions. It creates sound to accompany them. Sometimes it tells them to play 2 saxophones at once with specific notated instructions. And I've performed this work in multiple locations, and sometimes the numbers can get quite low, though inevitably they always seem to go up. And it's kind of interesting watching what happens in the hall during this piece, because you've got these performers who are absolutely virtuosic, playing raucous, crazy, loud music with electronic sounds accompanying them. And it's a spectacle, in other words. But if you look around the audience during a performance, what you tend to see are a lot of people looking at their phones, just frantically trying to manipulate that one single number. They become obsessed with the number and wanting to manipulate the number. And in fact, last time we performed this, people, after the performance was over, we left the number up at the intermission, and people just sat in the hall and kept playing with the number and pushing it higher and higher. So in other words, listeners became obsessed with the numbers and engage in some of the same behaviors that happen when they see visible metrics on a social media interface like Facebook. And this made me wonder, is there any way we could have a number that people could make higher, but that they wouldn't feel compelled to do so? And that led me to make this next work that I call Get More. Get More is an installation for visible metric and web-based incrementer. It's essentially a screen in a window, in this case outside the window of my office at the university. And if you go to the website getmore.io, it will increment the number you see on the screen by 1. Now, you don't see the screen on your phone. You don't see the number on your phone. All you get on your phone is just says working done, working done, working done. So if you're standing in front of the work, as Kate is here, you have that temporarily satisfying interaction of you press something here and it changes on the screen, you press something here and it changes on the screen. And I just left it and put it there. This is kind of tucked away on campus. A lot of people, not very many people walk by. And I wondered, well, was that enough? Will people hang out and try and make this number go higher? And sure enough, it did start to creep up over time, but I thought, well, maybe I'll go ahead and post an occasional message about it on social media and see what happens. And I did it a very nondescript way. I just said, visit getmore.io to increment this counter outside my office. I didn't explain anything more about the work. I took a photo of it, but again, you wouldn't know what your effect really was because you can't see the number go up. And I thought, is that going to have much of an effect? And I would post one every 2 or 3 weeks. And sure enough, the number did start to go up. Here it's at 1449. Eventually, over time, it got up to about 80,000. And when I looked at the logs, I can see that almost all of these increments are coming from people who saw these occasional posts on social media. Some people would, in fact, seem a bit obsessed by it, wanting to push that number higher and ask me, what's the number at now? So anyway, I took it down after some period of time, and then I installed it at Science Gallery in Detroit at their inaugural show called Hustle. And you can see its presentation there. It's just a big number on a screen. By this point, it had reached 81,000, and I wondered, well, what's going to happen? Now it's going to be in downtown Detroit in a gallery setting. Is it going to go way up, and who's going to make it go up? And sure enough, after 2 months, it got up to 287,000. And the bulk of these increments, even though this is a place people were walking in and out of all the time, the bulk of these are coming from outside the gallery, from these occasional posts on social media. So even the presence of a number in a gallery that people cannot watch go up is still a number that people feel compelled to increment. I would get emails and messages from people saying, I think I must have made it go up by 1,000. Like, it's really got to be a lot higher right now. And I'd go and look, and maybe it only went up by 100. So people are compelled to increment numbers whenever they see them. And so I guess I'll just have to keep trying to see if I can find some configuration of a number that one could make go higher that they don't feel compelled to do so. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about this work called Tracing You. This is focused on how computers watch us, is really the subject here. And the simple description of Tracing You is it's a website that makes its best attempt to see what it looks like where you are right now on the planet, and it shows it to you. So when you go to the website, this is just a screenshot, a GIF of what it looks like when it's getting a lot of traffic. When you go there, one of these 6 panes would be its attempt to see you. And then the other 6 panes are what it looks like for the other people who have visited at the same time as you. So if you just sit there and watch it, it's at tracingyou.bengrosser.com. Then you can see where people around the world are who are looking at the project. And how accurate this work gets is very much dependent on how networks are built, configured, deployed, owned. Sometimes it can get very close. It might even show a photo inside the building that you're in. But it could be a street photo from outside on the street. It could be from down the street. It could be from down, like half a mile away. And it could even be wildly dislocated from where you are, especially if you're using some kind of obfuscation technology like a VPN or Tor, then it really has no idea where you really are. So when I put this out in the world, people's reactions, one way to understand how it's being seen. Some people had a reaction you might be able to predict. This person said, "Brr, creepy, this website can find you and sees what it looks like where you are." Some people just thought it was cool. Like, hey, this website sees where you are. Check it out. This person did a screenshot and annotated it and said, hey, it found me. But others expressed anger about the project, but it wasn't anger about being surveilled. It was instead, it was anger over the work's surveillance not being as accurate as they thought it would be. So for example, this person said, a big fat fail doesn't do what it promises. And I think what happens here, you know, this person went there, they said, this website says it can find me. I went to it, it didn't find me as well as I expected. And, you know, that they were angry shows how conditioned we become to be accepting of surveillance. And it also reveals a desire for visibility that has emerged through the use of contemporary software platforms like social media systems. Incidentally, this work is currently part of an exhibition from Arbeit Gallery in London. It's a browser extension-based exhibition. If you go to arbeit.com, you can download it, and it's a group exhibition that will pop up tracing you at certain times a day, as well as other works by friends and colleagues here. I want to jump to the first work that I did after the 2016 presidential election in the United States. We were just starting to learn about, this is in December of 2016, we're just starting to hear more details about fake news and about disinformation, deliberate disinformation campaigns, as they had been playing out on Facebook in the run-up to the election. And one of my first thoughts was, I wonder what the role of the image might have been in some of these campaigns. And so I coded up a quick extension just to let me see what Facebook might look like without the image. And, you know, one thing I was thinking about is that Facebook has really transitioned over time. When I first got on Facebook around 2009, it was a heavy text content site. There were people were writing text, posting text. I don't even remember if we could post images easily on the feed when the feed came along at first. But it's really changed over time. And you can see this recording I did of just scrolling with Textbook installed in this is probably December or 2016 or January 2017. It's almost all image by this point. You know, honestly, I didn't, but we have learned more about what happens with the image or what the role of the image was on Facebook in those disinformation campaigns. And so here are two images that came out of the Senate Intelligence Committee of the United States investigating Russian interference in the 2016 election. So these are two posts that were put up by the Internet Research Agency from St. Petersburg, Russia, targeted at specific Americans based on data analysis. And you know, you can see that they're using the image. In fact, the image is the primary component here. And they're not just using the image in terms of its pictorial content, but they're also using it to exceed the text limitations of the system. Really, you know, these images are aimed at activating hopes and fears. And just as the thought exercise, if we'd all had Textbook installed in October of 2016, this is what those posts might have looked like. I mean, admittedly, removing images is a brute force manipulation. It's not a solution. A lot of the things that I make are not intended to be and are not solutions. But it is one way to ask this question for myself and to enable others to look at the system and to ask questions for themselves about what the effects of these might be. But if we're going to think about emotion and Facebook, another important aspect of the interface to consider are Facebook's reactions. And so here I'm thinking about the additions to the like button that were launched in 2016, adding wow, angry, haha, sad, and love. The idea, as represented by Mark Zuckerberg, was to give you better options for expressing yourself, to make it easier for a user to indicate how they felt about any particular post. And while reactions may help your friends better understand how you feel, it also begins to build up over time a more detailed profile about a user's emotional life on Facebook. I have a bar graph here. But it's not just to illustrate, but it's not just a tracking of relative emotional affect. It's a multidimensional picture of how one feels about specific types of content that they encounter. So it's emotions in context. But as is always the case on Facebook, especially when they add something, it's important to think about who benefits from this new system or this new addition to the interface, especially when it generates new data. And we certainly have reason to be suspicious of Facebook. Back in 2014, for example, it was revealed, Facebook revealed that they had been intentionally manipulating the news feeds of users without their knowledge to see if they are able to influence the emotions of those users by trending the news feed in a happy or a sad way, for example. Facebook was surprised that people were upset about this. There's been plenty of documentation or documented examples of data on social media networks being used by law enforcement, for example, to target activists. And we're still talking about and learning and thinking about, as the 2020 election approaches, how data on social media platforms was and is still being used to influence the electorate. At the time, after the election up through 2018 and 2019, we're talking a lot about Cambridge Analytica and their intentions to use psychographic profiling of Facebook data to segment the population for the purposes of targeted messaging. So Facebook and those who draw on its data, they've been engaging in a type of emotional surveillance. It's an emotional surveillance for the purposes of codifying each Facebook user's political and consumer identity to figure out, in their words, our hopes and fears. And so my response to this, which I launched in early 2017, was a work that I call Go Rando. Go Rando is a web browser extension that obfuscates how you feel on Facebook. And so every time a user clicks like, Go Rando intercepts that click and instead randomly selects one of the 6 reactions for you. So you click like and maybe you get love. Click like and maybe you get wow. You click like and you might get like, right? But over time, the idea is that a user will appear to Facebook's algorithms as someone whose feelings are perfectly balanced, as someone who feels angry precisely as much as they do haha or sad just as much as they do love. And you can still choose a specific reaction if you want to. It doesn't break that functionality, but even when you do, that choice will be obscured by an emotion profile increasingly filled with noise. In other words, Facebook and everyone else who gets access to that data won't know if a reaction was genuine or not. And so it's injecting noise into the system. It obfuscates how you feel. But of course, it isn't just obfuscating your feelings for Facebook. It also obfuscates your feelings for your friends. For example, maybe you have a friend who posts an exciting message about having gotten a new job and you click like and it selects angry. Or maybe a colleague posts about having fractured her arm that day and you click like and instead it says haha. These moments of friction where someone ends up asking why did you react that way? These incongruencies are an intentional part of the system. The idea is that it's helping to create conversation in a broader sense around what's happening here with this system. What is it asking from us? And it's forcing a previously subdued aspect of the interface into the foreground, which is that we're all reporting how we feel all the time. And we also feel compelled to report how we feel accurately when a system asks us to report how we feel. So I want to now jump to the summer of 2018. By this point, Cambridge Analytica is very much in the news. The Christopher Wiley interview with Carol Cadwalder in the Guardian was very much in public discourse. We're hearing daily about continued attempts by Russia to influence the midterm election as it was approaching. And as someone who recomposes software, all this made me wonder, is there something I could do that would help with the situation? I'd already hidden the metrics on Facebook. I'd already obfuscated emotion. I'd gotten rid of images. There's other works that I've made haven't shown today that were all aimed at this. But given that Facebook still at this point was a primary vector for disinformation, I wondered as an artist, what can I do about it? And this led me to release a work just after Labor Day 2 years ago called Safebook. And Safebook is Facebook without any of the content at all. No images, no text, no video, no audio, just the empty containers left behind after the content is removed. And it's a painstaking removal. It's meant to hide not just the images and the text, but to do so in a way that leaves behind all the other interface interactions, the rollover effects, the pop-ups. In fact, Facebook is totally usable with Safebook running. You can post a status, you can have a conversation, you can leave comments, you can watch movies, although you can't see them or hear them. Obviously, as with some of the other things I've shown, this isn't a great solution, but it does draw attention to not only to the challenge of making Facebook safe, given that it's an algorithmic walled garden that so many of us are dependent on at this point, and it's a kind of a consolidation of attention, but also to how homogenizing its aesthetics are, and to just how familiar the interface has become. At this point, when I made the work, Facebook's design hadn't changed in a while, and I could easily navigate the Facebook interface with Safebook installed. I knew what page I was on. I knew where to go to do things. I wouldn't necessarily know who I was typing with in the messaging box, but I could post a status. I could go through and do my daily likes and whatnot, regardless. And in fact, as here we are again, 2020, run up to the election 2 years later, just after Labor Day, campaigns in full swing, and we're still, nothing's much has changed. In some ways, maybe it's gotten worse. And so I've refreshed Safebook to fit with the new Facebook interface, and it's now currently also part of an exhibition at Science Gallery in Detroit called Future, Present, Design in a Time of Urgency. And there'll be some events around Safebook happening in the next couple of months, so you can tune into those if you're interested. I've got two more works I want to talk about. And this one is the work that brought Clark and I together on this project with Telematic and doing the screening. And it's a film I made last year called Order of Magnitude. And I've talked at length about how I use software recomposition to investigate how software engineers its users. But after Safebook, I realized I wanted to step back a bit and think more about those who engineer software in order to better understand how it comes to be the way it is in the first place. And that led me to focus on Mark Zuckerberg as a quintessential CEO in Silicon Valley. Using every one of his publicly available video recorded appearances as an archive. At the time, it was 2004 to 2019, so 15 years of video. I decided to extract from those videos every time he spoke one of three things: the word more, the word grow, or every time he uttered a metric. And I used this to create a video supercut that chronicles Silicon Valley's obsessions with growth over the last 15 years. And when I started working on this, I thought it would be a long supercut that might be longer than people would be willing to watch. Maybe it would be 5 minutes long or 8 minutes long. And I worried that maybe people wouldn't want to watch Mark Zuckerberg say the word more for 8 minutes. But as I kept working through the archive and finding other videos, and the archive just kept growing, and the video cut got to 10 minutes, and then it got to 15 minutes, and it got to 20 minutes, and I really had been worried that really nobody would watch this. It just kept growing until eventually by the time I was done, it's 47 minutes long. And the scale of the project, I would say, is fitting to its subject. You know, that it turns out to be this long is part of what's important about it. I'll also just say before I show an excerpt from this, that the piece is in temporal order. So, you know, at the beginning of the work, you see Mark Zuckerberg at age 19 in his very first interview about thefacebook.com at the time. And at the end, you know, in the last year, you're seeing him in front of Congress, having to answer questions about, you know, the disinformation campaigns on Facebook and the 2016 election, defending much of what's happening. He's very much under a lot more scrutiny at this point. So it really ends up being a kind of a chronicle of also what, you know, what he says over time and how he speaks over time about the company, and as well as kind of a chronicle of some of the ways that video changed over that time too. So I'm going to show just about a 4.5-minute clip of it so you get a sense of it, but it's currently streaming at telematic.com, and you can also see it on my website as well. And so I'll just play that next.
Many more, 400, 500, 100,000 for 100 or 200.
To grow it, and therefore it would grow thousands. I mean, there doesn't necessarily have to be more.
Almost 1 million. More focused on growing really quickly.
More than 40%, more than a third of a few thousand more schools.
I think I have like 15,000 pending friend requests. More, a few thousand, 100 or 200. The 100 or 200, 6 million, 6 million, 100 million, 100 billion of more. Hundreds of thousands, it's more, it's much.
Sharing more information, taper the growth, more engaging, and that users trust more, are going to be the ones that spread through the system more. They're going to get a lot more, become more open, share more, make themselves more open and share more. More than 70 million, maybe a few thousand speak more. Just grew so quickly, and there's more of it.
A lot more. Fastest growing hundreds of millions is more, a lot more, more, 50%, more than 500 million, more than 50%. And now it's growing. Was more, make them more, much more engaging, and 750 million for almost 500 million, multiple billions, it'd be more, a lot more, tens of millions of more that are more than 1 million, right? More than 1 million, 10,000, tens of thousands for one more, much more, a lot more, an order of magnitude more. It's more than 200 million.
Billion, the growth, more access to more. I'm so much more, 500 million more, probably a lot more, would grow more and more, sharing more and more, sharing more and more.
Billions, 1 trillion or more. Thousands of more than 1 trillion. There's a lot more. One more.
1 billion, 500 million, 500 million,
or more efficient. More. The first billion, way more. 6 billion, 11 million. 5 billion, 11 million. Kept on growing to the next billion. More, you know, a billion isn't like a magical number. 5 billion. Billions, 699 million. More than 40% of more competition. It's more. It's around 20%. And we're growing, more engaging, more sharing, more. What's more likely is that almost 1 billion grow, and more than 100,000 ungrow. You know, I mean, growing really quickly, more human, growing more stuff at more than one to get more. There are thousands at 100%. People want more valuable. We've been pushing just to get more 1,000 or 100 million, 9,000, 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or 8,000, 1,000, right? It's 9,000 or 10 million or 100 million or more. It's actually growing really slowly. It's not growing at a fast rate. 5 billion, 1.5 billion, 5 billion. It's about 2,600, right? 1,500 is the data.
Focus on the first billion. You know, the first billion, way more, continue growing. And more data, more, but also more money, more profitable, and then a lot more, multiple times more things. More profit gets more, do more things, more, get more, 100 or more, 1 billion or more.
Gross more has grown. To grow, it's growing more data, I think, do more. To grow more, accelerate the growth of tens of billions, a lot of more tools, more tools. It grows even more profitable and grows even more.
250 million, more to 1 billion, community of 1 billion. A billion's kind of an arbitrary number. It's a nice round number, but it's a little arbitrary. Billion. About 1 billion, 4 billion, 1,000 or 10,000 times more. More than half of more, then it's hundreds of millions, more than 15 million. More. Not less.
even more things, and more than 50 more, but more than thousands, hundreds of millions of more. When they said more than 100 more, and you grow
more than 100, grow more than everyone else, more than half, have more, growing growth team, growing more, about 1 billion, 5 billion to billions of more, a lot more.
More will be more, going to be a lot more. 85,000, about 200 to 225, getting more and more.
More followers got more engagement, about 1,100,000. It's grown into more than 1 billion, going to get more engagements.
Millions of more than 50 times as much. More, because when thousands of more,
more than 1 million, growing, more than 10, more and more, 2 billion more open, even more. More open, more. That the more are more 30 different, more than 100 million, almost 2 billion to 100 million of them, more than 50%. More, a lot more, 1 billion, more, thousands of more, so you can, a lot more than 1 million, thousands of.
We may find more, but we can do more. We will more than double. We'll add more than 250, share more services to help more thousands of, some of the more 100 times or 1,000 times bigger than billions and billions with tens of millions, as many as 2 million, growing and improving quickly, and we'll keep you updated with more soon.
About millions of more to do. And you can find more than 2 billion, giving more. So we've definitely grown. About 100 billion times deserves more than growing in importance. More experiences that we'll have about 20,000. There are tens of thousands of more, a few more things.
More than 20 million, more than 80 million, grow and grow. More, and we've been more, tens of thousands of more. We're more 20,000 more focused on more thousands of more and more, a lot more, still more steps give you more, a lot more like feeling more. 1.5 billion more deeply, more 2.5 billion feel more by 50 million, more than 2 billion of more than 2 billion, more 80 million, 4.5 million, many more. It's going to go more, just even more, 2.5 billion.
So as I mentioned before too, this is currently showing at Telematic, and it's what led to this talk happening today. It's also going to be part of the Japan Media Arts Festival in Tokyo. I think that opens in a week or two. Just to end this talk, I thought I would talk briefly or share briefly one work from this year, from the pandemic era. It's this work that I call Endless Doom Scroller. And doom scrolling as a term, it's been around for a little while, but it's really come into popular usage, and I think a lot of people have heard it, and when they hear it, they often identify with the term these days. It's talking about how we are often finding ourselves perhaps involuntarily, late at night, in bed with our phones, scrolling the bad news headlines that just keep adding up this year. And that even when we go to sleep, maybe we wake up, at least in my case, I'm staying up too late and I go to sleep, I'm not sleeping enough, I wake up too early and I go right back to my phone and I'm scrolling those same headlines once again. And doom scrolling, I mean, it makes sense, of course, that we're focused on the news right now. It's important for the purposes of personal safety to be aware of what's going on in the world. But it isn't just a natural reaction to the news of the day. It's also the result of a perfect yet evil marriage between a populace stuck largely online, social media interfaces designed to game and hold our attention, and the realities of the existential global crisis we're in right now. And so, yeah, it may be hard to look away from bad news in any format, but it's nearly impossible to avert our eyes when it's being presented by designed to be addictive social media interfaces that know just what to show us next in order to keep us engaged. And so the Endless Doom Scroller is an alternative interface. It acts as a lens on our software-enabled collective descent into despair. The idea is I'm trying to distill the headlines and the messages and interface conventions down to their barest, most generalized components to show us the mechanism that's behind our scroll-induced anxiety, interfaces, and corporations that always want more. More doom leads to more personal data for the companies. which leads to more profit. Facebook had an excellent second quarter this year, 18 billion, if I recall correctly. And by stripping away the specifics wrapped up in each headline and minimizing the mechanics behind most interface patterns, the Endless Doom Scroller offers up an opportunity, I would say, for possibly mindfulness about how we're spending our time online, about who most benefits from our late night scroll sessions as well. And if one scrolls as endlessly as the work makes possible, the Endless Doom Scroller might even enable a sort of exposure or substitution therapy, a way to replace what these interfaces want from us and do to us. In other words, perhaps the only way out of too much doom scrolling is endless doom scrolling. So whether I'm writing software or writing text or mining archives in order to make epic video supercuts, or crafting endless streams of doom, I use art to investigate the culture of software, to tease out how the designs of today's most ubiquitous software platforms are changing who we are and what we do, to reveal who most benefits from these changes and who is made most vulnerable. So thanks.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah. And so I guess we're gonna, if there are questions, we'll be happy to.
Here, let me bring myself back up on screen with you.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't need to keep this maximized either. I could stop. Yeah.
I'm echoing.
I can put my headphones on. How's that work for you?
Is that why I'm echoing? That might be better.
Okay,
so let's, I think I'm still hearing it. So if I'm a little disoriented, that's what that is. But let me extend a welcome to the stream chat and let you know that we're open to any questions coming from you all. If you've got them for Ben, I can relay them. Yes, here. There we go. But Ben, thank you so much for that presentation. I really love your work and enjoyed your presentation tremendously.
thanks.
Here's the delay. Here, I'm going to take these out just while I talk.
Yeah.
You know, for me, in terms of, in some ways, there's such a precise focus to what you're doing, but then there's also a really broad resonance. And I was trying to think about the sort of.
Sorry, I can't hear you. I think when you take out the headphones, then they're like the mic must be in the headphones.
Oh, geez, of course.
Could you just turn, if you just turn your volume while you talk, then that would.
Excuse me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. They do something like that. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, great. Yes, that's helpful. Or I just turned down my volume slightly. There we go. So I was going to say that in a way, I think your work seems so focused and in many respects so sort of, yeah, again, sort of precisely and rigorously focused, and yet it's got a very broad resonance. And I found myself through your presentation trying to parse the different horizons that you're working and the way in which they relate to each other. That is to say, like, if you talk about addressing cultural, social, and political effects of software, right? And a lot of what you've been talking about recently, it seems, is specifically in terms of social media, and maybe even more specifically in terms of Facebook, given its dominance of the space. And I think that the focus on the question of more, right, and the ideology of more, again, seems like such a clear and precise focus. And I'm thinking, like, okay, what is that then? It's a question of ideology. Is this the ideology of, right, it seems like in talking about that you're talking about contemporary technology, you're also talking about capitalism, like that you began in terms of talking about quantification and growth being sort of characteristic of a broader ideological, you know, the ideology of the economy. But then there's also a decidedly psychological dimension to it. Like when in the piece about More Like This, right, and show that people almost demonstrate an impulse to incrementalize, right? So is it, and I'm wondering, you know, in other words, that you're really exploring that intersection of quantification, psychology in the contemporary ideology. But I'm wondering then, do you see it as particularly coming from technology, or do you see the technology as a manifestation of broader, social or psychological tendencies?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I guess, you know, the businessification of contemporary culture is a trend that, you know, that, like, the businessification has been increasing over time to the point where, you know, it's rampant in all sectors of society at this point. From so we're not just measuring productivity performance in the workplace, we're measuring anything possible in any sector we can, whether it's education or teaching, or how many times someone looks away while they're supposed to be watching a particular video in school or in work. You know, so there's one trend that's been happening that really is just the increasing application of analytics and measurement in any sector that we can. And so that's kind of one thing that I'm thinking about. And that trend was happening independent of contemporary computational systems. You know, this was happening before Facebook. This was happening before Web 2.0, et cetera. But once these contemporary software platforms came along, and I would say that in particular, if we think about who created these software platforms that have become ubiquitous, that have largely become the method through which we communicate as a human species across the planet, more so now than ever before. You know, embedded in those technologies is the ideology that measurement and analytics is the way to best understand and improve the world. That we can't make a change in these systems. Like, just take Facebook as an example. You know, the quantification of the like, the idea that how many people liked something is the thing we should foreground over the people who liked it or what they said. That the first thing you should be looking at is the number. That way of thinking that comes from, say, Mark Zuckerberg, and isn't unique to Mark, but certainly he's a great example of it, has now become a central component in the systems we use to talk and communicate all day long, every day. And so we're in a unique moment now where I think, you know, as I, you know, kind of talked about early in the talk, we evolved as a species with a need to feel valued by ourselves and others. And for almost all of human history, until the very tiniest little slice, right, in the last 100, 200 years, whatever it is, right, that has been a qualitative thing. like how much we're valued is something we might have a conversation about or be able to discern by having a conversation with someone. But in the last 15 years in particular, it's now a constantly quantified thing, with, you know, embedded in an interface that is designed to keep us focused on the interface. And so I think, you know, we've got, so it's all these things kind of slamming together that ends up playing on our psychology, where, you know, if we evolved with a need to feel valued, and now the way in which we can know if that need is met is by paying attention to the numbers on Facebook or the numbers on Twitter, then it's just really hard for us to not have a desire, to have a feeling that we really need to be doing well in this way, which is why you end up seeing, you know, celebrities who have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers on Twitter are still paying money to get hundreds of thousands or millions more. They end up being made to feel competitive with others in these artificial ways. And of course, you know, the focus on more obviously is not just something that these interfaces compel. And we only need look at the West Coast right now to see the way in which our relentless focus on more as a species is playing out in terms of the environment, in any, I mean, really everywhere, anywhere, right? It's like the focus on, we have to have more, and growth is kind of an essential piece of the system by which we operate society, is having all kinds of negative effects. But I think the reason why I focus on Facebook a lot is, first of all, there's 2.5 billion people there, and Mark has aspirations to add the rest, is working hard to do it. But also because it normalizes that we should be thinking about everything in a metrics-focused analytics way, that is the way to understand the world. And I disagree with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. Well, so the resonance really is very broad. And its implications too. I had, you know, another intersection that I see, and sort of a question actually to say that I don't understand as much. Oh, I got to turn down my sound again. So disorienting. On the one hand, your practice is almost social scientific, right? You're really making analytic interventions of your own and venturing analyses of these systems. And so again, sort of rigorous in that regard. I'm struck in a way, well, you talk about floating your works as potential solutions, and I think that that is interesting, and I'm interested to hear more on the question of solutions. The solutions that I saw you presenting were effectively absurdist, right? Like to think about the rando, and where you convey, like somebody posts about the death of a loved one and you respond angry, you know, and the way in which there's that indirection. And I suppose my first question is sort of how you think about the almost social scientific rigor of the work on the one hand, and then the absurdism on the other. But maybe there's more just to be said about the absurd too. Like, how do you think about that? It sort of reminds me a little bit of heterosterol and the desire to be unseen, right? In other words, where you reintroduce the introduction of the indirection as the way of establishing like a blank spot and an unknown, and that you know, restores the space of desire and restores the, you know, the possibility of an interiority. But anyway, I mean, do you think of your work as absurdist? And or the thing about the Facebook where you're interacting with it, but you don't know what you're doing or what you're seeing, and it's a kind of irrationality too, kind of unconscious, if I didn't say that.
Yeah, no, it's a great and important question. I think I think the works that I make kind of span the spectrum from, for some people, some of those works, they might never even think about them as art at all. They might think of it as utility. I mean, the minimalism subreddit, it likes Facebook demetricator because it cleans up the interface, you know, it like gets rid of some of the noise. And you know, a lot of people who happen upon some of my projects don't ever know about their kind of role as an artwork or as critical software, or even that's kind of like, they don't know where it's coming from. It's just somebody sent them a link and they saw an article about it that said, here's one of the top 5 ways to improve your Facebook experience or something like that. And that kind of thing happens. And so, you know, demetricators may be on that range. And then SafeBook, of course, is kind of all the way at the other, where, you know, I didn't even put a toggle. Like, you know, my demetricators have a toggle where you can kind of flip the metrics on and off. SafeBook doesn't have one intentionally. it's more hardcore, I guess, in that sense. It's like that's not what this isn't for hiding things and showing things. This is for just hiding things completely. And that's kind of the proposition that's being made here. It's like, look at the thing that's left when we take what you contributed to the system out of it. And so, you know, from my perspective, the absurdist nature of some of these works, Go Rando is a good example too. It's employing humor. You know, like humor is an important component here. It's that there's something funny about clicking like and it says angry, or clicking like and it says sad, when you didn't intend to do that. And you know, the logo, which is the mixed up emoji, which comes from the Go Rando project that I kind of use everywhere now. You know, that's also trying to communicate like some of the aspects of these systems. The fact that some of them are solutions, I mean, it's interesting. You know, some people, I mean, there's been research done. People have written papers. People have tried, you know, done experiments with domesticators in particular. From a social science perspective, I've had a number of social science people come to me and want to, like, could we do an experiment? Shouldn't we investigate really exactly what this work is doing? And like, let's get into it. And my response is always, yeah, you should do that. That's not my role. I don't want to play that role. The moment that it goes into that is the moment that now I have to start.
When it becomes social scientific.
Yeah, like, I mean, I'm happy when the social scientists do experiments with it and play with it. But from my perspective, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Not because I have mad respect for the work they do, but if I start going down that direction, then I lose the ability to do the things you're talking about, because nobody's going to go, well, let's really study, you know, like how people feel when they use SafeBook, right? Like it's not the same kind of proposition. And I'm more interested in having the flexibility as an artist to look at the system and try something that nobody thinks makes any sense. The truth is that when I first did the Demetricator projects in 2010, 2011, released in 2012, a lot of people were like, why would you do that? That makes no sense at all. How would I even know what I'm doing or what matters? Or it was so foreign to people at the time. And it, you know, come like 2016 and Facebook comes after me and gets Facebook Demetricator kicked off, and the EFF ends up helping me get it back on. The election happens in fall of 2016, and then people start paying more attention to like, oh, well, maybe we should focus more on what's really happening with these platforms. Until now, we're at the point where there's, you know, endless scrutiny happening every day. I mean, there's really great tech journalism happening now that's really paying attention to what's going on. And even the companies themselves eventually came to say, even if they didn't make the decision to implement it, they experimented and have been experimenting with hiding the numbers and thinking about. So I think what it's an example of is a way in which art, because it's not beholden to specific methods, the way a lot of scientific disciplines are, where there's like a specific set of methods that everybody's trying to, you know, operate within. That's kind of an agreed upon set of operations that I can just kind of weave around and try whatever I want. Sometimes it makes more or less sense. Sometimes it really doesn't make any sense at all. Sometimes nobody would want to use it whatsoever, but that's okay. Like, and to me, that's the value of art. It's just a very different kind of value than what the sciences provide. And, you know, that it intersects and is in conversation with the sciences is something I appreciate and engage in. But I used to work in the sciences. You know, I used to do work in the sciences, and I'm really happy to be back in the arts. I originally was in the arts, and I spent some time in the sciences. I came back to the arts, and it's because it's where I'm most comfortable.
Are the quantifying tendencies you critique, are they inherent in the internet as such? In other words, are there contrary tendencies at work in digital culture that you see, in other words, spontaneously? Or is this tendency hegemonic?
I mean, I think in the way that software gets built mostly these days, or up until this point, is with very little diversity in the room, such that the people who are building software, they're mostly educated as engineers. To be successful in these fields from an engineering perspective required you to really be on a very specific kind of track in school, and then to go into, you know, I mean, I'm at the University of Illinois. It's one of the top feeders to Silicon Valley from our computer science program. It's very well ranked. There's an imperative to think about efficiency and analytics and metrics, and it's built into the curriculum and the way of thinking about the world. And of course, there's no way that you can build an efficient Google and an Amazon Web Services and all the, you know, and a Facebook that really does what it can do without intense, focused, specialized knowledge about algorithms and math and all these different disciplines. But what's missing often from the room, and I think this is getting more attention now, is the humanist side of knowledge, the critical designers, the social scientists, the information scientists, the history, the historians, the writers, the artists. I mean, all the people who spend most of their time thinking about these qualitative, analytical questions of culture and what happens. You know, the complicated nature, the things that are slow and difficult to tease out because they really require you to get into the weeds of what's happening in an interaction. And they're not easy to measure in a quantitative way. And I think those people have been missing from the development of a lot of the technology that we use every day. And so because of that, I think we have ended up with, you know, these machines that are amazing in what they accomplish. And I have them all around me right now, right? And they're enabling us to stay in contact in all these great ways. But they definitely, in the way that they're built, encourage us to think in very specific kinds of ways. And so you know, right now, I think thinking in quantitative over qualitative is embedded. It's a way of thinking, an ideological way of thinking that's embedded in the technologies we use every day. It doesn't mean that people can't make things that are more focused on the qualitative, of course, but when the interface is screaming at you, you should focus on the quantitative. It's hard to ignore it.
Yeah, indeed. And that space, it's not just a complement in that regard, like sort of a necessary, oh, we ought to be a little more warm and fuzzy. It also effectively runs contrary to the impulse to manipulate people's behavior. What did you say? I mean, that's sort of the absurdist moment too, again, but it's actually like deflecting that as what seems to have become kind of the dominant motive of the machine.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so hard for users is, you know, when someone makes a piece of software that ends up becoming dominant the way a Facebook has, the designers, the engineers behind what that system is have already spent a lot of time thinking about who the user they expect to arrive at the system is going to be, and what they're going to want to do, and how they're going to think, and where they're going to press. And they run tests to try to figure these out. And it's so hard to not be that person that the software wants us to be. This is, you know, Matthew Fuller talks about this as, you know, we engineer software, but software engineers us back. You know, it's like it constructs us as users as much as we think, you know, try to use it. And it's just, so these moments of, you know, I mean, Go Rando, it's a bit of software that enables you to easily potentially misreport how you feel on Facebook, but you don't need Go Rando to misreport how you feel on Facebook, right? You could just click any reaction you want anytime. You don't need an artwork to do that. You can use software platforms in ways that they weren't intended. And I'm teaching a NetArt course right now. In one of our exercises at the university, and one of our exercises is like a weekly software observation project where the task is to pay attention to what software wants from us in our daily operations with it. And then to think about, well, what could we do differently? How could we feed it something that isn't the thing that it wants? As a way of starting to find its boundaries about what it allows, what it doesn't. And there's plenty of great examples of this, of course, from other artists too. But it's, I think, as an exercise in general, humans, embedded in software worlds as we are now, need to be trying to, I call it software recomposition. I do it mostly through code, but you can do it just by taking what's given and using it in ways it wasn't intended to be used.
There you go. Maybe we should leave it at that, because that's almost an ethical imperative there, just to say, like, do it wrong.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm I'm happy for that to be the note we end on, as long as there weren't any questions in the chat there. I mean, I really see it as,
there's a good group here, but
yeah, I'll just say here at the end, then, it's, software is only going, the technology is only going to become more embedded in daily life. Like our phones, we're going to, I mean, if Facebook has its way, we're all going to be wearing, or Apple, we're all going to be wearing our headsets or our augmented reality glasses everywhere we go. It's these systems and the way of thinking that's embedded in them is only going to become more influential on who we are and what we do and how we feel about ourselves, about others, about how we decide what to talk about or we don't talk about where we go, what we choose to do, what we think we shouldn't do. And it's because of that, it's going to be increasingly important for everyday users to be as vigilant as possible, to remember that every piece of software that we encounter has, there are some who benefit from its use and some who are subject to its use. And the more we can take agency in that equation and know, or at least try to analyze what we're using and how we use it and think about how it's influencing us, the more potential we have to at least somewhat change that power balance of who's benefiting and who's made most vulnerable.
Well, terrific. And thank you again, Ben, for your presentation today and for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you to everybody who's logged in today and followed the stream. And I hope that you will check out our website and Ben's website and be in touch. Follow up with the any questions about the work or engagement with this material. It's rich indeed.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a fun conversation.